Welcome, everyone, to Rhythm and Resistance, a conversation about teaching and writing poetry with award winning authors and educators Renée Watson and Linda Christensen. My name is Dyan Watson, and I'm the co editor of Rhythm and Resistance, and I have the honor and pleasure of introducing our speakers. We are fortunate to have Crystal Butler and Brandon Kazan Maddox as our ASL interpreters. We very much appreciate their service. If you'd like to pin the interpreters, please feel free. We'll put that information in the chat in case you need assistance. I want to start by letting you know a little bit about the sponsor of tonight's event, Rethinking Schools. Rethinking Schools is a nonprofit publisher and advocacy organization dedicated to sustaining and strengthening public education through social justice teaching and education activism. Our magazine, books, and other resources promote equity and racial justice in the classroom. We encourage grassroots efforts in our schools and communities to enhance the learning and well-being of our children and to build a broad democratic movement for social and environmental justice. Our Zen Education Project, coordinated with Teaching for Change, has more than 100,000 educators who have registered to access our People's History materials. For more information, to sign up or purchase our materials, please visit rethinkingschools.org. And just one housekeeping thing, if folks would mute themselves, that'll make it much more enjoyable for the rest of us. Now, let me tell you about our speakers. After teaching language arts for more than 3 decades, Linda Christensen currently works as the director of the Oregon Writing Project in the Graduate School of Education at Lewis and Clark College. She is the author of Reading, Writing, and Rising Up, Teaching for Joy and Justice, and co-editor of Rhythm and Resistance, Teaching Poetry for Social Justice. She is a member of the editorial board of Rethinking Schools and has received numerous national and regional awards for her teaching and her writing, including the Fred Hetchinger Award for the use of research in teaching and writing, and the designation as the Outstanding Teacher in the Western United States, and most recently, the 2020 NCTE Distinguished Service Award. But more importantly, to me personally, I met Linda when I was 14 years old, and not a day has gone by that she hasn't treated me with respect, love, and dignity. She was my high school language arts teacher, a mentor throughout college, a colleague when I was a professor at Lewis and Clark, and is currently a thought partner to me as I've journeyed to Oregon Episcopal School. She is a good friend. Not just a good friend of mine, but a good friend. Renée Watson is a New York Times best-selling author. Her books for young readers have received several awards and international recognition, including a Newbery Honor, Coretta Scott King Award, and an NAACP Image Award nomination. She has given readings and lectures at many renowned places, including the United Nations, the Library of Congress, and the U.S. Embassy in Japan and New Zealand. Watson was a writer in residence for over 20 years, teaching creative writing and theater in public schools and community centers throughout the nation. She is on the Council of Writers for the National Writing Project and is a member of the Education Advisory Council for the Academy of American Poets. Renée grew up in Portland, Oregon, and splits her time between Portland and New York City. I met Renée when she was just a couple of days old. She replaced me as the youngest of the Watson bunch. There are 5 of us in total. She has been a fantastic storyteller and imaginative person since she was super young. When she was 5, 6, and 7, I remember my friends used to tease me because we'd be running around playing tag or what have you, and Renée would be sitting on the porch having conversations with no other human beings. It might be her stuffed animals, it might be her dolls, and they were real conversations. You would think there were other people with her. And that's how good they were. And she would ask our mother to play with her, and it wasn't enough just to play though. She would assign her a character and give her a role. And I'd like to think that some of the stories she was creating back then became the building blocks to books that we love now. Her ability to capture our imaginations is only surpassed by her amazing wisdom and dedication to her family. She's generous to all she loves. She too is not only a good friend to me, but indeed just simply a good friend. And I'm proud to call her my sister. This evening, Renee and Linda will discuss creating generative spaces for students to take risks as writers, finding poetry models that move students into writing, and tough questions about revising and grading poetry. Since this is Poetry Month and we're here to talk about poetry, I'd like to kick us off by reading Ode to Teachers by Pat Mora. I remember the first day, how I looked down, hoping you wouldn't see me. And when I glanced up, I saw your smile, shining like a soft light from deep inside you. I'm listening, you encourage us. Come on, join our conversation. Let us hear your neon certainties, thorny doubts, tangled angers. But for weeks, I hid inside. I read and reread your notes, praising my writing, and you whispered, we need you and your stories and questions that, like a fresh path, will take us to new vistas. Slowly, your faith grew into my courage. And for you, instead of handing you a note or apple or flowers, I raised my hand. I carry your smile and faith inside like I carry my dog's face, my sister's laugh, creamy melodies, the softness of sunrise, steady blessings of stars, autumn smell of gingerbread, the security of a sweater on a chilly day. So now let's turn it over to Renée Watson and Linda Christensen. And as they come in, I'm going to throw this question out to them. How do we create safe spaces to get students to write?
First, Dyan, you have me in tears already. Thank you so much for those brilliant introductions. I love them both. And I love your reading of the Ode to Teachers. I think it is a beautiful way to kick off the opening to this event, because I think the answer to your question starts with that ode, and that is a teacher who looks and sees her students and who blesses them by wanting to know their questions and wanting to hear their voices and waiting patiently for them to raise their hands. And I love that. And I can't think of two people I'd rather be sandwiched between than Dyan, Renee, and Watson on that poster to kick us off. So, Renee and I are going to have a conversation. I just want to start this by saying, as a classroom teacher, I always start on day one, not with the rules, not with thou shalts or what we're going to do in class, but with a poem, with starting with the students' own lives, and that's where we kick it off. That's the entry point, and that the other thing I would say about that is that it should be a poem that is an easy reach, that students have immediate success with. And so I'm thinking, where I'm from, raised by women, for my people, that there are poems that, and we'll talk more about this later, but poems that help students get into the poem, and that everybody can be successful. Renee, what are your thoughts?
Sure. So I have to say, I'm so honored to be a part of this. And thank you, Dyan, for that beautiful introduction. And Linda, I love you and respect you. So this is such a treat to hang out with you tonight. Yeah, when I think about creating safe spaces or spaces that allow young people to want to share, I think about taking the first risk, and modeling what risk taking is and what sharing is like. So I often start off classes and workshops with reading a poem myself. I try to never ask students to do what I'm not willing to do. So I'll read either one of my poems, so you can do the assignment that you are going to ask young people to do, and read your version of that assignment, or your favorite poem, or a favorite quote, just something that show students that you are not only teacher, but you are also artist or writer or a lover of words, and that you too want to be a part of the community and offer something creative to the space. So that's one way I think to kind of set the tone on the first day, like you said, not starting with just, rules and expectations only, but that the expectation is that we're going to share, and the expectation is that we're going to write, and that we're going to listen and take each other in. So that has to be modeled right away on day one.
Yes, and I love that you said that the teacher writes with them, because can we expect students to be vulnerable and take risks if we are not modeling that with them? And so I think that that is exactly right. I mean, I can show more through modeling my own writing, and also that my writing's not always great.
Yeah, I think it helps me know how to teach something by doing the assignment and writing the thing. It helps me realize, oh, this might be where they get stuck, or this is actually my instructions aren't clear, or it's not as easy as I thought it was going to be. So to actually do the writing assignment and play around with words helps me then artistically, it just helps me become a better writer, right? But it also helps me be a better teacher because I now have it in my bones of what it's going to feel like for my students to do what I'm going to ask them to do.
And I love that I have it in my bones, because that's what I think it is. And one of the things that I talk about in the classroom is that we can always choose safe or risky topics,
Mhm.
and that I model both. And so that it is a safe place for us to share and to learn about each other and to be vulnerable with each other. But there are times when we're not ready for that, and we don't want to open that up. We're not in a place for that to happen. And so I think talking about the idea and modeling and bringing in models of safe and risky topics, I think is helpful too. Um, I was thinking about also the about that piece of emotional risks,
Mm.
and and you've taken big emotional risks in some of your writing, and I'm thinking about some of the poetry that you did around with the death of, I think it was Ahmaud Arbery and Trayvon Martin, and you had students write poetry, and that's a huge risk. And what would you talk to with teachers about when that is appropriate or when it's not appropriate, or how to do that in a way that makes it safe for kids?
Mhm. So I will say that I when you start on the first day having the expectation that we share and we listen and we're a community and we celebrate, right? I always start with joy. So I would not on the first day or even within the first few sessions with the class, especially young people, start with heavier topics or serious issues, right? I want to know where they're from, like you said. I want them to tell me who they love, who loves them back, what are they proud of, right? We want to just build community and trust. And I want them to trust me so that when we go to something that might be a little more painful or more heavier risk, we've already kind of established a relationship with each other. So that's the first thing is if it's your first time with a group of students or young people, then doing the heavier topic is probably not ideal. So establish trust, and then I think it's also okay as an educator to know what you are capable of handling in the room. Poetry can be a container for emotions, and it is a way to add structure to what might feel so out of control, right? We're angry, we're sad, we're confused, we have all these emotions about what's happening. So allowing students to write about what they feel can help them process what's going on in a contained way instead of having like an open discussion. We're just going to talk about police brutality, or we're going to talk about the Black Lives Matter movement, right? Poetry allows you to kind of have some structure to that conversation. But I also think if you, as the teacher, are not ready to have that conversation, it is okay to maybe say, just to your class, I know a lot is happening in the world, and I just want to acknowledge what is going on. I'm frustrated. I have a lot of questions. I'm thinking about it. And then you can also just do the lesson that you have planned. I think sometimes we talk about social justice education, we think it has to be these lessons that are about racism, about sexism very explicitly. I think part of being a social justice educator is being human in the classroom. And sometimes I'm not ready to talk about something, but I can still just acknowledge what's happening in the classroom and give resources and say, here are some poems from poets who are addressing these things that if you want to read on your own, you can, that kind of thing, right? So I want to just say that first. You don't have to teach it if you're not ready to teach it, but you can still allow your students to know what is available to them and offer support to them that way. If you are teaching it, using strong models works. I've Danez Smith, Willie Perdomo, Ada Solis Garmay. There's so many poets who are writing about what is happening, what has happened, um, and bringing those models into the classroom and showing students how poets resist and how poets use their words to talk about current issues as a way to get them to have a strong model, and have something to kind of lean on so that they're not starting with just this blank page. So those are some things I would do. I would bring in the poets, bring in the protest poets who have done the work and use their work as a model and a structure for young people to look at, so that they have, like I said, a container and something to guide their writing.
I want to return to something you said because I think that the that when we talk about social justice teaching, I mean, we are talking about roots of inequality and, going to the hard places and uncovering that. But that's not all it is. And I
Right.
think that that's really an important piece is that it's also sharing our heritage, sharing our language, sharing where we're from, sharing our families. And I think that that's a really important piece of our work. Um, and I think that we need to keep, and I think we need to keep coming back to that,
Yes. And can I
that
add, I
we
think
don't leave it.
too, it's important, like if we I'm going to talk a lot about, Blackness because I am Black and I feel comfortable speaking from that perspective. So I think about being a student in a classroom, the way to show me that if you're like, we're going to do a Black Lives Matter unit, like that's fine, right? And I think that it is important to have those explicit moments, but to show me that my life matters is to also bring in material where Black folks are just human and not necessarily about the struggle or the pain of our experience, right? And so I think it goes hand in hand to make sure that we're having a balanced curriculum. And I think that's so what you did for me when I was in high school in your class. I never felt like a victim or never felt like I was only that single story that Chimamanda Adichie talks about, but all of me was welcome in the class, my joy and my pain, my frustration, my questions. And so I think that that's important too, that young people see the wholeness of who they are reflected in the curriculum. And that joy, joy is resistance also. So that a way to kind of resist and have young people think about, well, what do you want to say? Like take the mic back and tell your story. There's all
Mm.
these stereotypes and assumptions about your generation because of, your age or your gender or the zip code you live in. So what do you want to say about you? And let them kind of dictate. That's the choice that they will have, is the risk of maybe I'm not ready to share painful things, but I can certainly brag on my family, and so you get this variety of stories coming from students from that one prompt of just what do you want to say about who you are. And some will reveal very deep, maybe darker things, and some will stay in the lighter things, but everybody is sharing.
Mhm. And once somebody shares, it cracks open the class
Yes.
for everybody's hearts to be open and their souls bared. I want to go to a poem by C.J. Suet, who is the North Carolina Poet Laureate, because one of the things that people ask is how do you find poems or what poems to use? And I think one of the things is that we want to find poems that speak to, what's happening now, but in ways that students can find multiple ways to enter that poem. And
Yes.
I think that CJ Sewett's poem does that for me. So thank you, Ursula and Missy.
In the aftermath, I'm sure I'll feel like a tourist, passing through my own life. I'll add up my subtractions, stand in the great divide, multiplying the things I have left. In the aftermath of all this, I'll sing with you, in a choir stand, on street corners, and at my favorite karaoke night, I'll stroll aimlessly around them all, even though I hated them all. We'll brush shoulders and walk down the same aisles. I'll make you a meal. I'll never leave the party early without a really good excuse, and we'll dance. Bump and grind, spin and dip. I'll give you a spoonful of my ice cream. I'll let you try my beer, a forkful of my favorite dessert. We'll pass homemade dishes around a full potluck dinner table. We'll have hugs so close and tight the world will burst into giggles. I'll hold my friends' children, kiss the foreheads of my nieces and nephews. I'll bump your hand as we walk down the sidewalk. We'll hold hands without guilt. You won't have to look for the smile in my eyes. Above my masks, we'll get a window seat. As we watch friends and lovers gather on lawns and in courtyards, I'll remember the things that brought me strength, the ways I gave and was given to, how I learned to pause and breathe in the day, how I made a feast of my feelings and served it up, poem after poem, seeing myself both seed and tree. The world will see me in full color, Black and American. A resilient ancestry will hold our leaders and officers accountable. We won't be so well adjusted to injustice, and we will allow suffering to speak. We'll get to work and heal together. In the aftermath, I'll reach into my pocket for a letter from my past self that reads, I will be here for you. Yes, always and forever, even when the world stops. The cards have all folded, and you are in between the lines.
I love that poem. And I used it on the first day of the creative writing class that I taught at Jefferson High School this semester that I'm teaching, co-teaching. Um, and it felt like it made everyone relax. Like,
Mhm.
yes, I mean, I'm seeing people say, I feel near tears. It feels joyful. And it's that piece of a spoonful of ice cream, a sip of beer, of bumping and grinding with someone, of being able to sing again. Well, I would like to be able to sing for the first time, but that that it was the other thing about it for students was that it was that what we call raising the bones of the poem, that it's an easy reach because it's in the aftermath. I will. What are the things that you're looking forward to doing? And it was just such a great way to open up what are the things that you've missed that you want to do in the aftermath.
I love starting there and because so you get to learn about what students care about, right? And what their lives were like pre-pandemic and what they're looking forward to. And it's also a way of acknowledging what's happening in our world, but it brings in that lightness and that joyful hope that is important, I think, for beginning sessions, like your first few days together. Yes, acknowledge what's happening in the world, but how can we do it in a way that, again, is sets some structure and boundary to hold the emotions, right? And so I think this is such a good prompt to use with young people because it says, I know there's a lot going on. We're going to talk about it, and we're going to talk about it in a way that is hopeful and thinking about what are we going to do when we're able to gather like we used to. So yeah, I love that. And it allows you to get to know their hobbies and about their families and what they like to eat and make and all of that. So yeah, it's such a beautiful poem to share with young people.
Well, speaking of beautiful poems to share with young people, one of your poem, I mean, there are so many poems, and I want to just pause for a moment. We will make sure we get this in the mix, but I taught Renee's poem, um, A Psalm for Emmett Till. And we're not going to share that today, but I want to say that it is a beautiful poem that is does exactly what we're talking about. It holds pain and hope and wonder at the same time, and I think that it is a poem that should be taught everywhere to everyone because it helps us see that we are more than that single story. And you did that so beautifully. But the other poem that my students really love is your This Body poem, which is a definition poem. And so I'm wondering if you could read it and then talk about your inspiration for this poem that is part of a novel.
Sure. Yeah, I will. I'll read it and then we can talk about it. It's going to be on your screen. And I'll just say, it's a definition poem. So it's written in the way that a definition would appear if you look in the dictionary. So I'll begin. This body, a definition poem. Skin, noun, one. Sensitive, dry. See Dove soap, oil of Olay, shea butter. See middle school pimples plumping up the night before picture day, always on the chin or nose. Two, dark. See slave. See Negro. See age 7. See yourself playing on the playground when a white girl says, you must eat a lot of chocolate since your skin's so brown. Hair, noun, 1. See assimilation. See smoke from the hot comb crochet in the air, burning a sacred incense. See your mama parting your hair, bringing iron to nap. Hold your ear, baby, she tells you, so she can press Africa out. When Black girls ask, is it real? Say yes. When white girls ask, can I touch it? Say no. 2. See natural. Reference Angela Davis, Dorothy Pittman Hughes, comb yours out, twist yours like black licorice, like the lynching rope used on your ancestors' necks. Let it hang free. Hips, noun, 1. Reference Lucille Clifton and every other big girl who knows how to work a hula hoop. See Beyonce, dance like her in the mirror. Don't be afraid of all your powers. 2, you will not fit in most places. Do not bend, squeeze, contort yourself. Be big, brown girl. Big, wide smile. Big, wild hair. Big, wondrous hips. Brown girl, be. So
I
this
love
poem
that.
is in Watch Us Rise, which is a young adult novel that I co-wrote with my good friend and poet, Ellen Hagen. And so it's actually in the voice of the character Jasmine, who is really confronting issues around body image and identity around being a dark-skinned Black girl at a school who was kind of trying to put her in this box, in this theater class. She wants to audition for other kinds of roles that are not typically made for big brown girls. And so she writes this poem as a way kind of to protest and to stand up for who she is and all that she brings with her. I often say to young people, you know, we carry our memories and our families and the recipes that we grew up on with us when we go everywhere. When we walk into a space, all of that comes with us. So the definition poem is this way of saying, what is the memory? What are the memories that you have of your hair? Um, who have you touched with your hands? What are the stories of the scars on your knee, right? And it allows young people, again, a range to experiment with. I can share happy memories. I can share some sad ones. I can stand up for myself, all in this confined, limited space of talking about it with a little bit of distance because you're talking about it as the definition of your body instead of writing maybe a personal essay about a childhood memory, right? I think this is one way to go about asking young people to think about the story of their body and the stories that they bring with them when they come into your classroom. So that's kind of where we take it when we're doing workshops. Um, and I got the idea actually from Ellen. Ellen has a poem uh, in her adult poetry collection that is very similar, breaking down things by definition. And so we wanted to use it in the novel.
And I think one of the reasons I think it's a brilliant poem is it's a way, as you said, it allows students to come in and choose what are the pieces of themselves that they want to share.
Mm-hmm.
So some can be painful, others could be funny or, use their humor. And again, it's also multiracial. I mean, that you have a particular experience, but other students can bring themselves into the poem as well. And that's what
Absolutely.
we're looking for is what are the kinds of poetry prompts that allow students a space to enter and write themselves into the poem and into the classroom. And I think this poem does that really well.
Thank you. I think too, when I've worked with young people and had them write their own poems, we do a lot of listing and brainstorming. And before we even get to writing the poem and thinking about the definitions, I'm just asking them, what's the story of your hair? Just list out memories you have about your hair. And no one's going to look at your list. So you can talk about the worst haircut you've ever had, like all the things, some things you might not want to share out loud. That's okay. Right. And they're just listing. Tell me about a scar that you had. Um, who have you held in your arms? When have you cried? All those things. And then they'll have so much to then choose from for the actual poem that they're going to write. I always say, most writers, I am speaking for myself, but I think this is true for most of my writer friends. We never just sit down and say, I'm going to write a poem today and I'm going to start it right now, or I'm going to write a novel. There's a lot of brainstorming and thinking and planning and kind of sitting with an idea. So as much as possible, we want to create like a atmosphere for young people to even get kind of in the mood to write, and thinking and just getting them to come up with ideas so that when it's time to create the poem, they have so many things to choose from and they're really ready and primed to do the writing.
Hmm. And I want to pause to say how much I love that novel.
Thank you.
Watch Us Rise, I think it's a brilliant novel. I have taught most of Renee's novels in high school classrooms that I've been in. And in my graduate school class, I've been using, oh shoot, I'm just uh, skipping on the name. This is what happens when you
Piecing
send.
me together, maybe?
Oh, yes, piecing me together. Thank you. Yeah, because there's so many great things. I mean, it's wonderful with high school classes and middle school classes, but it has everything that graduate students need to work on as well. So it's a brilliant novels.
Thank
Yes.
you.
And This Side of Home about gentrification, and Beverly Cleary just passed, and Renée Watson is the next Beverly Cleary for Portland, sharing stories. Yes.
Thank you for that. That's a lot to say. I appreciate the love. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm sorry I don't have pictures up, but there's statues of Beverly Grant Park. And the days after she died, they were all of the little statues of the children and the dog were filled with flowers. It's quite beautiful, and letters to Beverly Cleary. It was
Oh, I love
wonderful.
that. Yeah, she's a beloved,
But
beloved author for me.
I want to go back to your poem because one of the things that I want to talk about briefly is that poetry, in addition to being yes, thank you. Oh, Stephanie's on there. Yes. We should rename Watson High School. Okay, we're going there. um, that one of the things is that, in middle school and high school classrooms, especially, there is this overbearing burden of literary analysis.
Mm,
And it's always taught as if students don't know how to do it and that they are empty vessels that we need to fill with how to look at literature. And I think poetry is a really great beginning of teaching students how to do literary analysis. So this year in teaching freshmen online, we used the Poetry Unbound um, uh, podcast with Pedro Cotuma and had students listen to him to see what he was doing in his. And the reason I bring this up is because students then chose their own poems to write about. And one student wrote about your poem, This Body. And the other thing I want to say about literary analysis is that students are doing it all the time. They are reading between the lines of text messages from their friends, of social media. They're reading between the lines of songs and interpreting them. And so we need to acknowledge that. And the thing that I love about this assignment is when students got to choose their own poems, they actually wrote really great literary analysis. And we're going to just look at one paragraph of a freshman girl who wrote about, first she did this homage to you and about how she has read all of your books. And I didn't give her a quiz to see if she actually had. But anyway, she chose your poem, This Body. And she wrote, I had a personal connection to every part of the poem. But the one I can connect to the most is the second part of the poem where it says, one, see assimilation. See smoke from the hot comb crocheting the air, burning a sacred incense. See Miss Tiny parting your hair, bringing iron to nap. Hold your ear, baby, she tells you, so she can press Africa out. When Black girls ask, is it real? Say yes. When white girls ask, can I touch it? Say no. See natural, reference Angela Davis, Angie Stone, comb yours out, twist yours like black licorice, like lynching rope used on your ancestors' necks, let it hang free. I felt every part of that. I say that because people have asked me if my hair is my real hair and if they could touch it. And it did make me feel uncomfortable. I also related to the poem when it was talking about sensitive and dry skin. My skin is sensitive, and so is most of my family. They had to do a podcast. And when she was reading in the podcast, she added in that her mother told her, don't let anybody touch your hair.
I love that. I love that so much. What you're saying about young people understanding how to read between the lines, I love, especially that you bring up music, because I think that is where so many of us learn metaphors, similes, personification, hyperbole. I mean, if you're listening to hip hop, it is so much hyperbole going on, right? And so they know how to access that type of writing and how to put words together in that way. And so I love the idea of kind of, saying to them, you already are a poet. You listen to poetry every day. You talk, if you're texting or if you're on Twitter, you already talk in very short, concise ways, right? And that is what poetry is too. So I love the idea of helping students already feel like they are, well, not feel like, but they are, they are coming to the table, to the classroom, to the page, with tools. And we're helping to sharpen those tools and give them some more skills towards craft, but they are coming with some knowledge. And I think saying that out loud, not just knowing it as the educator, but telling young people that is empowering and helps kind of just them exhale any fear that they have around, I'm not a good writer, I don't like poetry. I think if we just tell them and show them the ways in which they are already masterful at language, um, it's going to be easier for them to want to write it and want to engage with text.
Thank you. I think one of the things, if we move on, is that the whole idea of revision, and that one of the things is that every once in a while I get a poem that comes out very, very rarely the way that I want it to. And I love how you talked about how, we don't often start by just writing the poem, that we brainstorm, we create lists, we write a first draft, we get some stanzas going. And I want to pause here to talk about the fact that we do read arounds in the classroom so that everybody in the classroom reads. And let me just say, when Renee was in the classroom, you know, that it is a little intimidating to have somebody who was a great writer right off, but it is important to tell students that writing is not a competitive sport, that everybody has their own voice, and that CJ Pruitt's voice is very different than Joy Harjo's, but that doesn't mean that one is better. They're different and they have different stories. And in the same way, the students have different stories and different strengths that they can share in the classroom. And so that when we have a read around where every student reads, so let's say we started with Renee, and then after Renee reads, we all clap. And then we tell Renee what we love about her piece. And in the classroom, we only talk about what's working and what's right, because we learn from what somebody else has done. And then we take that and we use that in our own pieces. You said earlier that you got an idea from your friend Ellen and you used that in your poem. And so we are doing that all the time. We're creating mentor pieces for each other. And just as we are bringing in adult poems, we also, the poets in the classroom, become mentor poems for each other. And so we're able to see, oh, Renee did that. Oh, Josh did that. Let me see how Ursula did this and Dyan did that. So we're taking different pieces. And so the student who didn't get it, who maybe didn't have time to do it or maybe didn't understand it, after going through a read around, has heard 20 different versions of ways that people entered it. And so it's a way of saying, oh, now I get it. Can I? And I can't tell you how many times at the end of class somebody would say, can I take it home and do it again tonight? And I'm like, yes, you can.
Yes.
So let's start with that. Just the importance of saying, hallelujah, you are wonderful the way you are. And let's talk about everything that's right.
Yeah, and talking about what's right also helps the writer know what to keep doing,
Mhm.
right? If you tell me that I'm really good at metaphor, then I want to keep using metaphors in my work. So I think it's just a way to help students be comfortable giving feedback and receiving feedback, and it keeps everyone encouraging each other to share stories. That was having the read around in your class was the best. Like, it was like my favorite part of class, not just because I got to read my work, but because I got to know students and classmates who I didn't hang out with. So I didn't know their stories. So it's also a way to build community. I think what was powerful about your class was that constantly I was learning how to be a writer. There was no compromise on craft and really learning what it takes to, be a strong writer. And at the same time, there was no compromise about what it takes to be a strong community member. And doing both of those at the same time, asking students to push themselves to be kind and thoughtful, and you have to listen in order to be able to give feedback. Like, all of that was happening while we were also learning the craft of writing. And it was just such a powerful experience as a high school student to be given um, the chance and to be trusted that we can handle having those kind of open conversations. And really, peer critique groups is what was happening, that sometimes felt better than what I ended up having to do in college when we would critique each other's work. So yeah, I so appreciated those days. When I think about revision, I also think about, again, using music and helping students realize that I'm not saying this is wrong. I'm just saying there might be another way you could tell this story, or how do we want to make it stronger? So I talk a lot about remixes and, pulling a song that they love and then playing the old school version of it and showing them that people take words all the time, the same exact words, and do something different with them. And so asking them to do that with their work is another way to just help them see revision as not like, oh, I did this wrong and I have to go fix it. But how can you make it stronger? How can you have a different intro, a new beginning or ending? I think it just allows them to want to play with language and not feel like they're in trouble.
I know. I love that. It's an article in Rhythm and Resistance where you talk about the Donny Hathaway and oh
Oh, it's
yeah,
Killing Me Softly, Roberta
yes,
Flack
Feeling
and
Softly.
the Fugees,
Yes,
with Lauryn Hill. Yeah, that's the song that I use the most, because they are familiar with both, and both have a good little beat and rhythm to it.
yeah, and the students always are like, "Oh, my mom listened to that." Probably now they'd be saying, "My grandma listened to that," you know.
Yes.
Well, one of the things, and we have some slides on this, is that I think it's important to actually, I mean, there are times when students say, and I like to get sort of a raft of poems going. So it's not just like, let's revise, you wrote one poem, let's revise it, but get several poems going and then say, select one, because there will always be somebody who's like, it's exactly the way I want it
Yes.
right now. And and they don't want to change anything. So, okay, you can have a few of those poems where nothing needs to change. But probably there's some places where you might want to go back in. And so giving them specific ideas about how you can go back in and what are some ways that some strategies that poets use. And so one revision strategy is to add a list. And this is from Brown Dreams by Paul Flores, who I love.
This is a brown dream. Brown as the bus riders union. Brown as gasoline. Brown as the Tigris, the Euphrates, the Mississippi, and the Rio Grande. Brown as coyotes. Brown as the blood-soaked sands of Iraq and on the Arizona border vigilantes. Brown, brown as affirmative action in the military, but not the university. This is a brown dream. Thank you.
And one of the things that I just noticed and we'll go back to a couple of more, but returning to your Psalm for Emmett Till, you did a series of lists in there. What I wonder and what I know, and what your mother said, and so can you talk about lists in your poems?
Sure. I think listing creates rhythm in a poem, and I think it also drives home the idea, right? So when we're talking about making lists within poems, I think it's a way to help young people break out of the kind of, does a poem have to rhyme? And so sometimes they're trying so hard to rhyme that the poem loses its meaning because they're choosing a word that kind of isn't the best word, but it rhymes. And so I always think that repetition, listing, just repeating maybe one word, that all helps build rhythm in a poem without having to make it rhyme. And that's a tool that so many students love to experiment with. And it
Mhm.
just is a way to help them think about, like, if you think of the chorus of a song, driving home the theme of the song, listing something over and over is driving home that theme that you're trying to have your reader really feel. And so that's a way to get them thinking about, well, what's the message of my poem and what am I really trying to say? And then they can go back and highlight something to repeat over and over again.
Yes, and I think it's also a way to bring in really diverse poets. I'm seeing that some people are mentioning poets in the different poets in the chat, and I think that it is a way to introduce students to the technique, but also to a lot of different poets. We might use excerpts from different pieces, um, but it's also a strategy to use in narrative, in fiction, in memoir, in essays, and so for them to see that the kind of dancing that they do with language in poetry is something that we want them to lift over and embed also in their other writing, and that's what good writing does. So poetry, I think that poetry is the weightlifting of all writing, that we do. We have a couple of other slides of other kinds of strategies that we use. And I know this is one of the things that you talked about, Renee, in your article on remixing and revising that's in Rhythm and Resistance, but just using metaphors and similes.
Yes, after you've taught something and they've experimented with it, when they're revising, you can ask them to, well, go find the things that we've talked about. Where are the metaphors, similes, personification? And the reason why you're using that is to surprise the reader by making us view the world in a fresh way. So it allows young people to play with language. So much of writing is serious and they might feel stuck. But if you just let them experiment with metaphors and personifications, so much gets kind of unpacked for them and it kind of explodes and then they get super creative with language. So in her poem, Left Memories, Patricia Smith uses personification to give her hips a life of their own. The line is, I can't walk in a straight line without my hips wailing, hallelujah. And so we would talk about that with the class. What does it mean for your hips to wail hallelujah, right? And have a discussion about that. And then we could go into all kinds of, well, what do your hips do? Or what do your hands do? And think about personifying your body or whatever it is that they're writing about. So again, we could pull lines from Patricia Smith and from other poets to give them several examples of ways poets use figurative language and then have them experiment with their own.
Yes, and I think for me, Patricia Smith she is like such an amazing wordsmith.
Yes.
And I will often just take chunks of her poems and put them up, or her essays, and have students highlight the verbs to go through and say, or the personification, the imagery, choose 5 and write your own poem just from this poem, or take one of her verbs and go back and see where you could use it. So revision is not just one thing. It's like constant, you know, looking at what are folks doing in poetry these days, and how can I use some of that? And for me, I love this poem, Wellfleet Whale by Stanley Kunitz. Um, uh, and so he again uses similes, uses really strong, specific, concrete language and details that I want students to bring in. And so it's a poem to the whale who's dying in Wellfleet Harbor. You have your language too, an eerie medley of clicks and hoots and trills, location notes and love calls, whistles and grunts. Occasionally, it's like furniture being smashed or the creaking of a mossy door, sounds that all melt into a liquid. And one of the things I like about this poem is that, it's sort of, and like with the Patricia Smith line about her hips wailing hallelujah, is that poetry is not just about flowers and pretty things, um, that it's also about, sounds like furniture being smashed, that it can be, you said you used the word surprise, and I like that word in there. And then I think the next slide is just, this is just kind of a summary of a list of some of the things that students can do. And there's a lot more, but just, having them go back and highlight um, places in their poems where they did the change of the line break, added concrete details, made the verbs more active. That one of the things that I'm doing with this class, because we're online and it's weird, is that they're going through and reading their poem and then going back and creating a flip grid about the changes and talking about, as a poet, what changes did they make and why did they make them? Because I think it's really important for students to be able to articulate, I made the change to more active verbs because, or I created a list, as you said, to create rhythm. So anyway, just
I love that. I'm sitting here thinking about checklist also. Like a lot of times students, because we're just, the way education is set up is like, I give you assignment and this is what it needs to be. And students want to know, well, when is it done? How do I know that I'm finished and that I did it right? And, they want to make sure they didn't do it wrong. And it's poetry. So it's hard to tell a student, well, it's not finished, or it is finished, or, so um, to help them know when their writing is finished, I often make a checklist and say, these are the elements that make a strong poem. This is what we've been talking about in class. We've talked about personification. So I want to see that in your poem. If I'm looking at, the Where I'm From poem, for example, I want all five senses to be present. Something you smell, taste, touch, etc. So that they can self-guide themselves and think, oh, do I have the five senses? Am I using sensory detail? Do I have a moment where there's personification? And they can kind of know in that regard that they are using the tools that a writer uses to create, and that sometimes helps guide them even when they're stuck, or like, well, what else should I add? Then they can go back to that checklist and think, oh, I haven't done this yet, so let me work on this in the poem. And I find that to be helpful when revising, to give a revision checklist.
mm-hmm. And that comes to the point of grading. And so I will just put it out there that I really kind of don't believe in grades. I believe that that really what we need to do is keep the writer going back to the writing. There are pieces that I've written, that I have rewritten, and then rewritten for another purpose and taken it in a different direction. And so I don't think that writing is often ever done. And I think that what I want to do as a teacher is reward effort, to reward students taking risks. And that's very different than trying to get to compliance, which is what often is what is being graded. And so I want students to be wild and frisky in the classroom, or maybe wild and risky. I'm not sure about frisky, but I want them, I want them to feel free to try different things. And so I think that grades hamper that. And so I know that I'm being successful as a teacher if the students continue to write and that the grade is not what matters. That what matters them um, is them moving forward in their writing. And yes, I have to give a grade at the end, and that is it done? Did you work on a revision? Then you get all the points. You get all the grades. You get all the Tootsie Rolls. So
Well, we have some questions
Yes.
in the chat and in the Q&A. So I guess we can both just read from them as we like.
That
I
sounds
see a
good.
question that's asking about isolated units or teaching poetry throughout. And do you prefer one method over the other? So are you only doing like a poetry unit, or is poetry a part of your overall curriculum? You want to speak to that?
No, because I was reading it and I'm like, I can't do two
So
things at
I'll
once.
read I'll do the questions. I'll
Okay.
ask them, and you can just listen to me read them to you.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm going to
So
stop reading.
yeah, don't look. It's a lot,
Okay.
and
Okay.
yeah, it can be very distracting to have to do both. Okay. Do you teach poetry in isolated units or throughout the year mixed
Oh,
in with other units? Do you prefer one method over the other?
yeah. Poetry all year, poetry as part of every unit. I have a thing I call the Holy Trinity. And so apologies to religious folks, but for me, that's poetry, essay, and narrative should be in every unit. And so I'm teaching them. I will do some standalone poetry things, especially when we're feeling really sad and burdened, um, or we need a break. But in general, I weave poetry in, and I think that it should be just part of the dance of the classroom. What about you, Renee?
Oh, absolutely. As a teaching artist, which is most of my teaching experience, has been as a guest writer in the schools, writer in residence, teaching alongside English teachers. My whole, like, I would come in to integrate into their curriculum. So whatever they were teaching, whatever unit they were on, my role was to look at that unit through the eyes of poetry. And sometimes I was partnered with a social studies teacher, or I was with a math teacher once. So we did a lot of formula poems and haikus and things like that. So, so yeah, I think that poetry can be taught in any unit. There's always a way to help young people uh, be creative, and poets write about so many topics. I think there's always a way, even just a stanza of a poem, to bring in, to tie to a text is a powerful way for young people to see story in many different ways. So I like to pair a poem even with a novel, and
Mhm.
maybe I'll read that poem to start off the study of a novel that we're going to be writing. And you know, if any of you have read my work, there's oftentimes poetry is in the novels that I write, because that's just how much I love it and how much I think young people resonate with it.
There's a question that Julia Putnam asked. She said, Renee is cooler than me. Although I know Julia Putnam and I think she's really cool. So there's no comparison there. You're both cool. Does Renee have a more recent song that is a remix or uses a sample that would be more relevant to kids today? That has to be a your question because
So here's the thing. It's not about having the song be relevant. I use that song over and over again, no matter what the age of the students are or anything, because it is a good example of Roberta Flack's song has a different mood and a different tone. Um, there's layering of instruments and layering of her voice that is very different from the Fugees. And it's a perfect example of how they took what she did and created something new, but that also kept so much of the bones in the original song. So I have tried to use other things, thinking, let me get a song that's current, and it just doesn't. I don't know why it doesn't work the same. Yeah. So I just always go back to that, because that has been kind of the tried and true song. But so you can certainly experiment, but I would say that I've taught the lesson many, many times. And whenever I've used a different song, the lesson kind of falls a little flat. So I've just always gone back to just using good old Roberta and Lauryn Hill. They are the tried and true for that lesson plan. And yes, the song is, people are asking in the chat, it's Killing Me Softly is the song.
and um one of the things, there's a question, and then I'll go back to you asking a question on the next one, but asking about students' consent to share their work. Some students are really enthusiastic sharers, but some really want to keep their work private, especially when they explore more personal topics. And so um, I would say my answer is that everybody shares. That was the point of saying safe and risky at the beginning when we talk about it. Like, what, how comfortable do you feel sharing this topic? And sometimes, I mean, I'm not going to make that hard and fast. That but that when you begin with sharing from the beginning, that students are ready and willing to share, that they're, the reluctance comes from there being critique. But when there is love, and we start the first day by giving everybody slips of paper and they write the student's name on it, and it's like those old Valentine's cards, and so what you get is at the end of the first day is a basket of love from everyone else in class. So,
Yeah,
Renee?
I agree. I will sometimes say, okay, that you don't have to share the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
Choose a part that you're comfortable with us, no, hearing. Because the expectation is to share up front, they already know that I'm going to ask them to read their work aloud. So I get that a little bit less because they're prepared. And so they are probably, making sure they don't write something that they don't want to share. But if that happens, and it has a few times, I'll
Mm-hmm.
just ask them, okay, that's fine. Just read the first stanza. You don't have to read the whole thing. Or sometimes, every now and then, and I don't make this the rule, uh, but sometimes I have when I really know something is happening and they cannot handle it that day. Can you share what you wrote about?
Mm-hmm.
So every voice needs to be heard in the class. So I don't let a student say, "I'm not sharing today." But fine, you're not ready to read the piece. Can you tell us what did you choose to write about? And sometimes that works, and a lot of times then they just decide to read it anyway. So it's so interesting of like giving them the choice of talking about the work or reading the work. They're like, okay, fine, I'll just read it. So sometimes I think students are pushing because they really want to make a choice, and then I give them that choice, and they're like, fine, I'll read my poem.
Well, the other thing that I find is once somebody has shared something personal, that other students are more likely to share, and it becomes part of the classroom culture. And so, what is originally terrifying, yes, courage is contagious.
Yes,
That, and it's courage is contagious, but it's also that, oh, it's okay to share that I'm not perfect or that my family's not perfect, or it's okay to share my pain here. And often students don't have places to do that. And so the classroom can become, Renee, you talked earlier about the container, and I love that image and that word. And I think that the classroom can be a container for um, our courage, for our pain, for how battered we feel by the world, by our joy. I mean, that all of that can be there. And it starts on the first day and by us being willing to share as well.
I also think that it allows students. You mentioned like it doesn't have to be perfect, and so this idea that writers only like it comes out as the novel that you have in your hand, or that the poem that you're reading that poet wrote it that one time and that's how it came out. So even I will say I just will acknowledge I know these are first drafts, no disclaimers. You don't have to tell me it's not finished. You don't have to tell me you don't have a title yet. We're just sharing, so that it kind of takes the pressure off of this is a performance, or I have to sit up a little straight and really read my poem to the class. It's more just like I'm sharing a work in progress, and that also just encourages them to know that we will be revising these too. So it's setting the expectation of really a writer's workshop, and that this is you're going to be always exercising the muscle of sharing and revising in this class. We're
Yeah.
almost out of time. I want to make sure there's one last question though that I think I would love
Okay.
for you to speak to,
Yes.
Linda. It's about how do you as a teacher, maybe if you're not even comfortable writing poetry or you don't know a lot of poems, how do you become more comfortable yourself as you're trying to get students to engage? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, come to the Oregon Writing Project.
Yes. And buy all the
But
books from Rethinking Schools that Linda has, created about writing.
but I do think, oh yes, there's Juan and Heather. We have some OWP people in the house. I really think that, you know, what do I want to say? I want to say that when I first went through a writing project myself in 1980, that I thought, oh no, everybody's going to find out that I'm an English teacher and I don't know how to write. And I was really afraid to share. And that I think that we need to not think that we're done either. That just like writing is that we're in a that we're constantly revising our writing, we're constantly revising ourselves as a teacher. And just because we went through graduate school doesn't mean we're done. That we need to reach out and find experiences where we can be pushed to share, um, and to do to take to make some experiments ourselves in as writers. That I don't think that, and to find a really good and respectful place to do that, because I was pretty much hammered and shattered by my creative writing class in college. Um, and so I think it's important to find the right space and the right people, but even doing it together with a small pod and reading some poems or taking, I mean, honestly, this is not a just a big sale for rhythm and resistance, but in a small group, taking some of the lessons from rhythm and resistance and um, and practicing those poems with each other, because that's how we become better writers. I mean, just as Renee said at the beginning, we write all the poems, we write all of the pieces too. Oh, Long Island Writing Project, yes. Well, Renee, I want to give you the last word before I do the closing. It was so wonderful to be with you here today. Renee and I have been writing partners since she was riding her trike around the block in our neighborhood. And so it's beautiful to share this space with you and Dyan today. And thank you so much for your generous gift of wisdom with us today.
Oh, thank you so much. It's an honor again to be with you. I guess, what I'll say, I talk about Linda a lot because I love her, and also because she really is a good teacher, the kind of teacher that even now, as a grown woman, I still have a relationship with her. And I know that so many of her student stories, we all feel like we're her favorite. We all feel like she loves us deeply, and we all have carried those lessons forward. I think what I'd like to say to educators who are with us tonight, the beautiful thing about being a teacher is that you are planting seeds. And sometimes you are the first person to plant the seed. Sometimes you're the one that's watering it, right? And you don't always know what that harvest is going to look like. Not all of us get to go back and tell our teachers thank you, or let them know what we're up to. But please know that you are doing the good work, and that what you do in the classroom, it really does matter. I have so many teachers in my life who really fanned the flame and nurtured me, and helped me become the writer that I am. But more importantly, I just think the human that I am. Like, I don't think Linda wanted me to necessarily be a published author, but she wanted me to, love my neighbor and be kind. And so what you're teaching is not just the subject matter that you're teaching, you're really teaching young people. And so thank you so much for doing the good work and for inspiring and nurturing and loving on our young people, especially right now with all that's going on.
Amen. Well, we want to end with thanking all of you who came tonight, um, and for being here, for sharing this space with us, for your wonderful chat. I'm, have a difficult time reading both of them and being engaged, but your words have been so enlightening and inspiring and helpful in the chat and in the questions. We also really want to thank people who made solidarity donations to help make this webinar possible. Rethinking Schools is a small nonprofit, and so your support means we can keep making these events free for those who can't afford it and open to the public. And if you haven't already, it's not too late to support the webinar, which really supports our work for Rethinking Schools, getting social justice tools and resources into the hands of educators across the country. And consider making a solidarity donation or joining Rethinking Schools monthly sustainer work. The donation link is in the chat. But mostly just thanks for, we opened with an ode. Dyan opened with the Ode to Teachers by Pat Mora. And so thank you so much, teachers, for all the heavy lifting that you've had to do this year during the pandemic with reaching students online. It has been hard. I am co-teaching that writing class so that I could see how hard it was, and it is hard. And so thanks for all of the great work that you're all doing. And thank you also to our ASL interpreters, Crystal and Brandon. Thank you to Ursula and Missy for doing all the work behind the scenes, and to Dyan for kicking us off. Thank you, everyone.